My name is Jack Miller. I was 20 years old that morning, a kid off a small farm just outside Toledo, Ohio. I'd barely been out of my state before the war, and now I was in the 1st Infantry Division, packed into a steel landing craft, shoving toward a stretch of French coastline called Omaha Beach. It was June 6th, 1944, D-Day, and the 1 hour I'm about to tell you about would feel longer than my entire life up to that point. At 06:25, I checked my watch for the 10th time, though the glass was fogged with spray. The channel was a heaving gray monster, the landing craft bucking and slamming down so hard my teeth hurt. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and vomit. Men were retching off the sides or swallowing it back down, white-knuckled fingers clutching rifles and helmet straps. 5 minutes, the coxswain shouted over the engine and the crashing waves. 5 minutes until the ramp dropped. Across from me, Corporal Diaz from New Mexico made the sign of the cross, his lips moving silently. On my right, Sergeant O'Leary from Boston checked his Thompson again, even though he'd checked it twice already. Beside him, Billy Harris, my bunkmate since basic, grinned too wide, the way you do when you're terrified and don't want anyone to know. "You okay, farm boy?" Billy yelled over the noise. "I've been better," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He slapped my shoulder. "Just stay low and run like hell." Above the wind and waves, we could hear distant thunder, our battleships shelling the coast. Every few seconds, the sky flashed, and a heartbeat later, a deep, rolling boom followed. Somewhere up ahead, an entire continent waited, occupied and strangled by the enemy we were here to drive out. They told us at the briefing, this was the day that would decide the war in Europe. We weren't just hitting a beach. We were opening the door to free France, free Belgium, free Holland, free everything Hitler had taken. I'd thought of that the night before, lying on my bunk in the transport ship, staring at the metal above me. I'd thought of the flag folded in my pack, the one my mother had put there, and of my father's rough hand on my shoulder when he saw me off. "Do your duty, son," he'd said, "so they don't have to come here and do it for us." Now in the landing craft, my hands were shaking around my M1 rifle. I tried to steady them by tightening my grip. I told myself this was why I was here, for home, for my little sister back in Ohio who could sleep without hearing bombs, for people in towns I'd never heard of who might one day say, "The Americans came." 2 minutes, the coxswain yelled. We could see the coast now through the slit at the front, a long curve of pale sand under gray sky backed by bluffs and cliffs. Smoke drifted above it from the bombardment. I could make out dark shapes, concrete bunkers, pillboxes, things we'd only seen on briefing maps. The closer we got, the louder everything became. The cannons, the surf, the rattle of distant machine guns. It hit me then, like a sudden punch to the gut. Some of us would never make it off this boat. A high whine cut through the air, artillery incoming. "Down," O'Leary shouted. I dropped, curling against the steel side. The shell landed somewhere off to our left. Water leapt into the air, drumming like stones falling against our hull. Another explosion closer. The boat lurched. Cold spray slammed into us. "Keep your heads, boys," O'Leary roared. "We trained for this." No amount of training felt like enough. 30 seconds, the coxswain yelled. The world narrowed. The men in our boat, the rifle in my hands, the pounding of my heart. My mouth was dry as sand. I thought of home again, not in some noble, cinematic way, but in fragments. The smell of hay in the barn, ma humming over the stove, the feel of Ohio soil under my bare feet. I wondered if I'd ever see it again. We slammed into something, an underwater obstacle, maybe, a jagged jolt that sent us stumbling. "Drop the ramp," someone shouted. The ramp began to grind down. The world exploded. The front of the boat opened on chaos. Machine gun fire stitched the water in white spurts, bullets whining and snapping past. Men in the front rank went down at once, cut to pieces before they could even step off. Blood sprayed across the steel. A man screamed, high and shocked, then fell silent. "Out, out, get off the damn boat," O'Leary bellowed. Instinct took over. I leapt forward with the others into what looked like waist-deep water. It was deeper. The sea swallowed me up to my neck. My pack dragged me down like a stone. I lost my grip on my rifle. For a second, cold green water filled my mouth and nose. The roar of battle became a muffled roar inside my skull. I kicked wildly, arms flailing, but my boots were heavy, my gear a dead weight. Panic took hold, raw, animal panic. I was going to drown before the Germans even saw me. "Drop your pack," a voice boomed faintly through the water of my mind. O'Leary, I thought, or my father, or God. My fingers clawed at the straps. They were twisted, tangled. My lungs burned. My vision began to dim at the edges. Then the buckle slipped free. The weight tore away, sinking out of reach. My head burst back above the surface. I coughed, retched, sucked in air that stank of cordite and salt. All around me, men thrashed and struggled, some going under and not coming up again. Bodies bobbed in the water, turned face down. Bullets hissed and pinged, flicking up spouts inches from my head. Ahead, the beach was 100 yards away and might as well have been a mile. "Move," someone shouted. "Get to the shingle." I started to swim, half stumble, legs churning against the sucking sand. An explosion slammed into the water nearby, tossing me sideways. My ears rang. For a heartbeat, I heard nothing but a high, thin whistle. The world went white, then came back in jerks of motion. Billy appeared beside me, coughing, his helmet gone. "Jack," he gasped, "come on." We staggered forward together, using the twisted steel of a Czech hedgehog as cover. Machine gun fire chewed into it, showering us with sparks and flakes of metal. "Keep your damn head down," Billy yelled. I didn't need to be told. We pushed onward, ducking from one obstacle to another. Angled posts with mines on top, tangles of barbed wire, more steel crosses half buried in the tide. Men dropped around us, some with a grunt, some with nothing at all. I tried not to look at their faces. A bullet smacked into the sand inches from my hand, spraying grit into my eyes. Another pinged off my helmet, ringing my skull like a bell. I hit the ground hard, tasting blood. "Get up, Miller." O'Leary's voice cut through the chaos somewhere behind me. "Move or you're dead." I crawled, hands and knees, then a stumbling rush, then hands and knees again. The beach felt endless, an open killing field. The German guns chattered from the bluffs, relentless, mechanical. Every time I thought there couldn't be more bullets, more shells, more explosions, there were. At last the ground rose slightly. A low line of stones and broken shingle lay ahead, just above the water line, like the edge of a world. "Shingle, get to the shingle," Dia screamed. We threw ourselves behind it, pressing into the wet gravel as close as we could. It wasn't much, but it was something. A thin lip that the machine gun fire mostly couldn't see past. I lay there, chest heaving, water pooling under me, sand grinding between my teeth. Men were packed shoulder to shoulder along the shingle, some firing upward, most just clinging to it as if it could somehow save them. I groped around until my fingers found a rifle, a fallen man's M1. I didn't look up to see whose. I just grabbed it, checked the chamber, and hugged it to my chest like a lifeline. Billy slid in beside me, gasping. "Thought you were fish food," he panted. "Almost was," I said. My voice trembled. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin and broken. On my other side, Diaz was swearing in rapid Spanish, then English, then prayer. "We're pinned, Sarge," he shouted down the line. O'Leary crawled up, his face streaked with sand and something darker. "No kidding," he growled. "Those guns up there have us zeroed in." Above us on the bluff, I could see the flashes of German machine guns in their bunkers, spitting death down the slope. Our guys tried to fire back, but it felt pathetic. Rifle rounds against steel and concrete. Another shell crashed into the surf behind us, flinging water and men into the air. A body landed 10 feet away with a horrible, boneless sound. I shut my eyes for a second, then forced them open again. "We can't stay here," O'Leary said, more quietly now, close to our ears. "We were sent to breach that wire and get off this damn beach. If we don't, the waves behind us are dead before they get here." "How, Sarge?" Diaz asked. "We stick our heads up, we're gone." O'Leary pointed with his chin. Up the beach, maybe 30 yards away, a tangle of barbed wire stretched across the sand, beyond the shingle. Beyond that was the slope leading up to the bluffs and the German positions. "We've got Bangalores," O'Leary said, "still on the beach. We get to 'em, we blow gaps in that wire, then we push up. That's the plan." "And who's we?" Billy asked, though he already knew. O'Leary's eyes went along our little group, then settled on us. "Me, Diaz, Miller, Harris. We'll take a couple more if they're still breathing." My stomach clenched. I imagined leaving the relative safety of the shingle, that thin line of stones we were clinging to as if it were home itself, and stepping into that storm again. I felt very small, very far from Ohio. I thought of turning my face to the stones and saying, "No, I can't." Just staying there and hoping someone else would do it. Then I saw something that cut through the panic. On Diaz's torn sleeve, the small embroidered American flag patch. Dirty, wet, but still there. On my own sleeve, I could feel the same patch under my fingers. This was why we were here. Not because someone ordered us or because we wanted medals, but because behind us, behind this whole beach, was a chain of ships and countries and people who were counting on us to move forward, not burrow into the sand. "I'm in," I heard myself say, before I'd even fully decided. Billy snorted, like I'd let you have all the fun. Diaz just nodded once, jaw set. "Good," O'Leary said. "On my mark we go. Stay low. Use anything as cover. Do not stop until you hit those Bangalores. Understood?" We nodded. "Ready?" He took a deep breath. "Go." We exploded off the shingle like stones from a sling. The world narrowed again to sound and impact. Sand kicked up into my face as bullets struck around us. I ran bent double, legs pumping, lungs burning, the rifle banging against my side. A man to my left jerked and fell, his helmet spinning away. I didn't look at him, couldn't. We dove behind a half-buried obstacle, then sprinted again. The wire loomed closer. I could just make out the long cylindrical shapes of the Bangalore torpedoes, half covered in sand where some earlier team had dropped them or died trying to use them. "Diaz, Harris, cover," O'Leary yelled, "Miller with me." We skidded in beside the explosives. They were just long metal tubes, but they felt like hope. If we could get them under that wire and blow a gap, men might actually get off this killing ground. Machine gun fire ripped the air. Something snapped past my ear so close I felt the wind of it. I dropped flat out of instinct. A second later, a sharp, hot pain tugged at my upper arm. For a moment I thought I'd been hit, but when I looked, it was just a groove in my jacket, a thin line of red welling underneath. "Get those tubes together, Miller," O'Leary barked. My hands shook as I grabbed the sections, screwing them together, making one long lance of metal. I fumbled twice before they finally locked. Bullets thudded into the sand around us. Someone was screaming, a long, shrill sound that didn't stop. I tried to block it out. Longer, O'Leary shouted. We've got to get it past the first run of wire or we're wasting it. We added another section. My fingers felt huge and clumsy like someone else. Finally, we had a length O'Leary was satisfied with. Okay, he said. On 3 we shove it under. 1, 2, 3. We heaved the assembled Bangalore toward the snarled wire. It slid under, scraping on rocks and buried stakes. I pushed until my shoulders screamed, my boots digging trenches in the sand. Far enough, O'Leary yelled, back, back. We scrambled away, leaving the tail end of the explosive jutting out from the wire like a spear. O'Leary yanked a fuse lighter from his pocket and snapped it onto the end. His hands were steady, his jaw clenched. You light it, Miller, he said suddenly, looking at me. Me? The word came out stupid and higher than I wanted. You're the one who's going to remember this, he said. Do it. For a second, I saw myself from outside. A skinny farm kid, soaked and shivering on a French beach, trying to light a fuse while the world fell apart around him. Then I reached out, thumbed the lighter, and watched the fuse sputter to life. A tiny snake of flame in the chaos. Back, O'Leary roared. Get back. We dove behind a low rise of sand and rock. I pressed my face into the grit and covered my head with my arms. The seconds stretched. 5, 10, 15. Nothing. Did it. The world kicked me in the chest. The explosion tore the air, a sharp, hard crack that smashed into my eardrums and shook the ground. Sand, wire, and wooden stakes flew overhead in ragged pieces. The shockwave punched me into the earth. For a moment there was only ringing, a high electric whine inside my skull. When I lifted my head, the wire where the Bangalore had gone was gone too, replaced by a jagged, smoking gap. It worked, I whispered, half in disbelief. It damn well did, O'Leary yelled, though I barely heard him through the ringing. We've got a breach, move through. We sprinted for the gap. Behind us, I heard shouted orders from our shingle line. Men were getting up, following. Hope, thin but real, was spreading. As we ran, Billy stumbled. I grabbed his arm out of reflex, yanking him upright. Thanks, he gasped. Don't make me drag you, I said, though my throat was so tight I could barely get the words out. We plunged through the gap in the wire and onto the rising slope. The cover was marginally better here. Craters from our pre-invasion bombardment pocked the earth, offering shallow bowls to duck into. The machine gun fire from above was still vicious, but no longer an unbroken curtain. Smoke hung in ragged patches, smearing the air. We threw ourselves into a shell hole halfway up the slope. Dirt and stone pattered down on us. How much, I coughed, spat grit. How much time has it been? Billy glanced at his watch, smeared with mud. 10, 15 minutes since we left the boat. Feels like a year. I checked my own. 0650. 25 minutes since the ramp had dropped. In that time, more men had died than my entire hometown held, or so it felt. We weren't done. Objective still up there, O'Leary said, pointing toward the dark mouths of the bunkers above. Those MG nests don't go silent. This beach stays a slaughterhouse. How many of us are left? Diaz asked. I looked around. A dozen, 15, hard to say. Faces I knew were missing. Some might have made it this far and just ended up in different craters. Some. I didn't let my mind finish the thought. We've got enough, O'Leary said. We pushed to that next rise, then up to the trench line. Once we're in their trenches, it's a different game. Close quarters, I trained for it. Bayonet drills, room clearing, all the things they teach you with wooden dummies and shouted cadence. None of it had felt real then. It did now. We moved from crater to crater, creeping, running, hitting the dirt, then doing it again. The slope was slippery with loose stones and worse. Once, my foot skidded on something soft that made my stomach lurch. I didn't look down to see what it was. Bullets snapped overhead. A few thudded into the earth around us, kicking dust into our faces. A mortar shell landed 50 yards away, spraying fragments that whined like hornets. One of our men, a kid from Iowa whose name I only half knew, spun and went down, clutching his leg. "Keep moving," he shouted at us through clenched teeth. "Don't stop for me." For a moment I hesitated. Every decent instinct I had screamed to go back, to grab him, to haul him along. But the slope ahead and the guns above and O'Leary's voice shouting, "Forward," all tugged me the other way. I met the wounded soldier's eyes for half a second. He gave a tight nod as if to say go. So I did. At 0700, we reached the lip of the first German trench. Everything tightened inside me. This was it. The line the Germans had drawn across Europe, the edge of the fortress they'd thought was impregnable. Somewhere beyond this trench, someone was feeding belts of ammunition into the machine guns that had turned our beach into hell. O'Leary peeked over, ducked back as a burst of fire ripped across the edge. "Two MG-42s in that nest there," he said quietly. "We hit 'em from both sides. Dyers, you and Harris swing left. Miller with me on the right. Frag 'em, then finish what's left." My fingers closed around a grenade at my belt. It felt absurdly small for what it was meant to do. "On my signal," O'Leary whispered, 3, 2, 1 now." We popped up together. For a frozen instant, I saw the German position in front of us. The dark rectangle of the firing slit, sandbags piled high. A half-dozen helmeted heads turned toward the beach, their attention fixed on targets below. Someone shouted something in German, their voice sharp with alarm. I yanked the pin, counted 1, 2 under my breath, and hurled the grenade into the opening. It vanished inside the nest. We dropped back down, covering our heads. An instant later, the explosion punched the air, muffled but brutal. Screams followed, jagged and very human. "Go," O'Leary shouted. We vaulted into the trench. It was narrower than I'd imagined, smelling of damp earth, sweat and cordite. A German soldier stumbled toward us from the side, blinking through the smoke, his rifle half raised. He couldn't have been older than I was. For a fraction of a second, we stared at each other, two scared kids in different uniforms. Then he swung his rifle toward O'Leary. I didn't think. My training took over where my mind stopped. I brought my M1 up, sighted center mass, and pulled the trigger. The recoil thudded into my shoulder. The German jerked and fell back into the trench wall, sliding down out of sight. My hands started to shake after the shot, as if they were only now catching up to what they'd done. O'Leary clapped my shoulder once hard. "Good shooting," he said quickly, then moved past me, firing down the trench. We surged forward, our rifles barking, pushing through the smoke and dust. Another German appeared, this one reaching for a pistol. Dyer's Thompson chattered, and the man sprawled across the duckboards, his weapon skittering away. In less than a minute, it was over. The MG-42s that had raked our beach were silent now, their crews dead or dying. The bunker's interior was a shattered mess of splintered wood, torn metal, and the ugly aftermath of war. I focused on the guns themselves, the curved receivers, the still hot barrels, as if they were the only things that mattered. "Get those things turned around," O'Leary snapped. "Point them inland. We hold this position until the next wave gets up here." Dyers and Billy scrambled to obey, wrestling the heavy guns around. I moved to the firing slit and looked out. The sight stole my breath. The beach below, which had been a slaughterhouse half an hour before, was changing. Men were still going down, but others were moving, crawling, running, surging past the shingle and through the gaps in the wire we'd blown. More Bangalores were exploding up and down the beach. Smoke blossomed in white and gray flowers as more cover went up. Small knots of soldiers were starting up the slope, using the same craters we had. Medics dashed among them, armbands bright white against the grime, dragging wounded men to whatever shelter they could find. Farther out in the surf, more landing craft were grinding ashore, ramps dropping to spill out more men, more courage, more fear. Behind them, ships stretched to the horizon, a steel armada under the gray sky. "We did it," Billy said quietly beside me. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes too old for 20. "We actually did it." "Part of it," O'Leary corrected. "We hold this, then we push inland. This is just the first step." He was right, of course. Beyond this beach, there were hedgerows and villages, rivers and fields, towns with names we'd never heard of and would learn the hard way. And beyond those towns, there was Germany itself. But standing there at that firing slit, my hands still trembling around my rifle, I let myself feel it for a moment, the weight of what the last hour had meant. At 06:25, I'd been a seasick kid in a boat, scared out of his mind. At 07:25, because that's what my watch read now, the minute hand ticking past the 5, I was standing in a captured German bunker on French soil, looking out at a beach where our flag patches were moving forward instead of dying in the surf. We paid for every yard with blood. Men I joked with on the ship the night before were never going home. That would never be okay. Nothing would ever make it okay. But the choice we'd made, to get off that boat, to cross that water, to light that fuse, to push up that slope, meant something. It meant that someday, some French kid might run on that beach without hearing machine guns. It meant that little sisters back in Ohio could grow up in a world where tyranny lost. Diaz reached into his pack and pulled out a small, folded rectangle of cloth. It was a tiny American flag, the kind you wave at a parade. He glanced at O'Leary. "Think they'll mind if we redecorate?" he asked. O'Leary snorted. "If they do, they can take it up with Eisenhower." We found a length of bent rebar, jammed it into the sandbag wall above the firing slit, and tied the little flag to it. It hung there, fluttering weakly in the smoky air, hardly visible from the beach below. But we could see it. I looked at that flag, then out at the men still fighting their way up, then at the bodies on the slope in the sand. "Jack," Billy said softly, "you okay?" I thought about the fear that had almost frozen me in the water, about the German kid in the trench, about the man on the slope who told us to go on without him, about my father's hand on my shoulder and my mother's flag in my pack. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be. We've got work to do." Outside, the guns kept thundering. Orders were shouted. Men moved. The hour that had felt like a lifetime slid into the next one, and we pushed inland deeper into a continent that was no longer entirely under enemy control. That 1 hour, just 60 minutes on a cheap army watch, had changed everything. It had turned farm boys into soldiers, turned fear into action, and carved a beachhead into a fortress Europe was sure we could never crack. We were tired, terrified, and grieving, but we were on the shore of a freed world, and for the first time since the war began, I truly believed we were going to win.